Ready? And I get used to move over a bit, mate. You can't really see your leg coming there.
I should be moving.
I would think so. Maybe more.
Okay. There we go.
See, you can see it better.
So if you don't enjoy the show, it's his fault. First of all, I'd like to really thank everybody here. You know, we Canadians these days are between a bit of a rock and a hard place. You know, we've been hit hard by tariffs. Of course, we've talked about us being the 51st state. Try not to look at our American friends here. But, you know, we Canadians tend to try and shy away from trouble. So, as a matter of fact, you know, if we don't feel like seeing an American, I just go to Cuba. If I don't want to see an Englishman, I go to a gym.
So you go to Scotland.
If I don't want to see a Scot, I leave the pub. But I do want to say, though, that I was talking to Andrew, and really, we really feel great coming here. This is a class act. Class act. You know, you've elevated the bar, Neil, and it's such a high level, and I won't mind saying that next time I'm on the Leno Sanik's show. So hopefully you'll get more North American members, and it's been truly great. And all of you, thank you. Whether someone's lent a charger, I had a lift. I've going to Scotland. You know, feel like royalty, except nobody's throwing tomatoes at me. So that's
Model pole.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My cousins are in Scotland, so it's not going to be a restful time, I can guarantee you. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to talk to you about something. Honestly, Neil, when he called me, he said, "Paul, we'd like you to come to England, and we'd like you to come and present." I wasn't ready. I didn't even have my passport. Okay, so I had to wait for my passport. You know, my PowerPoint is void of pictures. I'm inspired by the White Album.
Black and white. I hope there's no Revolution 9.
Well, there might be, who knows? But you know, the presentations I've found enthralling. It's incredible. A hell of a lot of people inspired by Malcolm, and others have done research in the files. And there's an awful lot of talk about how the files help us understand Perman, or how does it help us understand the fingerprints, or how does it, but how could I put it? When we wrote Chokeholds, okay, for those of you who are familiar with Chokeholds, it's really 10 areas of proof that are indisputable to prove a conspiracy. And my colleagues and I were lucky enough to go and do the rounds on the you know, podcasts, and thing with putting it in French. It's a completely different world. The French, they have no qualms of putting you on mainstream media. So when it came out in French, I started getting phone calls. Or when the Luna Committee started, they phoned me in Quebec because I'm the local expert. The reason I'm the local expert is because we had Oliver Stone come to Quebec City, and when he came, my name got into, you know, the press files, and so they say, "Hey, we want to know more about the Luna Committee, and we remember you did this 5 years ago with Oliver Stone." So there's an awful lot of interest. But guess what question? I talked to them about Chokeholds. Guess what their biggest question is?
Who did it?
Who the hell did it? And that has nothing to do with Chokeholds. So I decided after Chokeholds that I would focus most of my efforts on the who, the how, the why, and using files, using all sorts of information, and doing surveys. you're asking people in the community, well, what do you think the motivation was? What do you, and so what you're going to hear about today is not just prior plots. The reason you do prior plots is what? Why do you do prior plots? Why do you not analyze prior plots?
Practice?
Pardon?
Practice, maybe?
Well, practice.
Similarity with.
Similarity. It's called similar case analysis. Why? That's how you profile an offender. You profile an offender by saying, well, did he do it before? And, what are the similarities? And in the case of JFK, that's tough. Why? Because the Secret Service destroyed a hell of a lot of files around the prior plots and the trial. But not long ago, I came across the mother of all prior plots. It's called Pepe letters. So I'll talk to you about what that revealed, because that plot has a lot of truces. And if you conclude that the plots are too similar for them to be happenstance, let me ask you a question. I solved one of the earlier plots. Do I not solve the Kennedy assassination? If it's an offender profile, right? Do I not solve it? And you'll see that the prior plots evolved to something else, because I was looking mostly at prior plots. But if you have an offender, right, and you start saying, hey, there seems to be intelligence in the removal of the president, what are the real prior plots? Is it Chicago? Is it Tampa? Or is it not Chile? Is it not Congo? Is it not the removal of Che Guevara? And anybody who looks at those regime changes, you see a hell of a lot of the names coming back. You see Felix Rodriguez, where he's the one, he's involved in Che Guevara's death. He was involved in Iran-Contra, right? If you look at Jenkins, he was in Vietnam. If you look at all these people, and those are the prior plots, really the prior cases that we should all be looking at to figure out how you do a regime change in the United States. So that's sort of the theme of what we're going to be looking at. Yeah, we're going to look at similar case analysis. What came out of the similar case analysis the first time I did it, I mean, this was crazy. I had written a few articles for Jim DiEugenio, and all of a sudden, I come on Dick Russell's work. Listen, I'm hearing about this Policarpo Lopez. Lamar Waldron wrote about Policarpo Lopez. And we all know how crazy it was for Oswald to open a Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans, the worst city in the world, probably, because they depend on trade with Latin America. And you're going to try and recruit. I mean, I always give the example, that would be like opening a Fair Play for Al-Qaeda after 9/11 in New York City. Doesn't make any sense in the world. So he goes and he does that. The Fair Play for Cuba, what's going on here? Fair Play for Cuba committee. And then all of a sudden you read about Policarpo Lopez being, a potential patsy. Oh, what did he do? He attended Fair Play for Cuba committee meetings shortly before the assassination. Then you hear about Yvonne Marlowe and a potential plot in Los Angeles. Oh, isn't he heading a Fair Play for Cuba committee chapter in Los Angeles? So you have to ask yourself the question, what is the Fair Play for Cuba committee? And what's the link there? Why are so, even when Jim DiEugenio says, is this true, Paul, that Policarpo Lopez and Yvonne Marlowe and Richard Case Nagel, what did he have in the back of his car? A Fair Play for Cuba committee flyers. Okay. I'll talk to you about framing the patsy because it's intimately linked with the Fair Play for Cuba committee. Then I'll talk to you about the Pepe letters. Okay, because we talked about similar case analysis in the book, Chokeholds. There's a chapter on prior plots. It doesn't include the Pepe letters. It's one I discovered about 3 months ago. And I started looking at it and I said, what? And then I said, oh my God, this is crazy. Then what you want to look at once you start seeing that the cases are similar, is there a modus operandi in these cases? Is there something that's going on here that we can pick up? So you have to understand ZRRIFLE, Northwoods. I found a really interesting letter, memorandum in 1960 that involved Lansdale and Cuba. We'll talk about. It has to do with modus operandi. Black letters. Anybody familiar with that term? Well, I discovered it in the most recent releases. And some people have zeroed in on black letters. This is a key point. One of the most important testimonies on tactics and strategy with respect to executive action comes from Dick Bissell. We'll talk about that. QJWIN. Who here is familiar with the name QJWIN? Raise your hands. Okay. Who here knows who he is?
Burger or something?
Pardon?
Burger?
Who knows who QJWIN is?
Yeah, is it Burger?
I didn't hear that.
Burger, he said. Is his name Burger?
Surname?
Well, I'll tell you, QJWIN, in my opinion, it's not a person. Okay, it's not a person. But there are QJWIN associated people. And I'll tell you what I think.
Kind of like jam waving away.
Well, QJWIN is the name of a program. QJWIN1 is a person. Okay, and I'll talk to you about that. Roselli, is he sort of a QJWIN? We'll see. Okay. Now, the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is there's so many names in this. There's so many intelligence names. And I started asking myself, the DDO, the Director of Plans, the DCI, the technical division, who does what? And Dave Boylan, one of the great researchers, is working with me and Jeff Meek right now. And we pretty well put together the CIA org chart of 1963. So you have to ask yourself, within this chart, who are the most likely people to be involved in a regime change operation or an executive action? And then we'll conclusions and questions. So similar case analysis. It's the first thing you would perform if you were doing a real serious investigation. If there was a murder here in this neck of the woods, the police would be asking themselves, well, was there something similar that happened not long ago in the area? Oh, maybe there was. Does it have all the same hallmarks? Was that done? Was that literally done in the JFK assassination? Well, the HSCA says no, because they say, hey, when we look into Policarpo Lopez, it is egregious to us that you guys didn't look into it, or nor did the Warren Commission. Egregious, because Policarpo Lopez attended Fair Play for Cuba committee meetings. He left shortly after the assassination. He went to Laredo, he went to Mexico City, and he was reported to be the lone passenger on a plane to Cuba. Whether that's true or not, you kind of bring it up and say, hey, maybe we should look into this, right? They didn't do it. They didn't look into LA. They didn't look into a whole pile of other similar cases. And we know that the Secret Service shredded those files when they were supposed to hand it over to the ARRB. Why? Now, I just want to make sure. Yeah. Now, had they done it, the other thing we know is that we look at some of these threats to Kennedy. What were they? Chicago in the 5-floor building? We know Joseph Miltier, right? He was saying he was going to be killed from a high-powered rifle in a tall building. There are 3 or 4 other cases. How could someone have been at an open window on the 6th floor when you have those threats that took place before them?
Was Valley not making threats to him as well?
Yes, that's Chicago. Yeah, Chicago. So, you know, you have these, and Jim Douglas wrote it. He says, the Secret Service revealed the Chicago threat to the forwarding Secret Service people, and they looked into it. There's no way you would have had a Tommy alone in a window like that. It didn't make sense, right? Now, had they looked into it, it would have confirmed a template. It's a template. What you look at, there's at least 2 of those plots that are linked, but probably a lot more. So if there's a template, what does that say? Central coordination, right? It's not Oswald in Chicago. It's not Oswald in central coordination. Now, I'll make a long story short, is when I started going through the threats and the similar cases, because it started off being prior plots and it morphed into something called similar cases. And when you associated the individuals with the potential cases and you looked into their profiles, you found a hell of a lot of similarity. I'm going to go through briefly a few of them. You had Lee Harvey Oswald associated with Dallas, obviously, but you also had him associated with a potential plot in Washington, right? There was somebody walking around like acting crazed who looked like Oswald. The chauffeur reported that and told it to no other than Floyd Boring and gave his report. 62, remember that date, October 62, Springfield, Illinois, 2 riflemen. They're caught. They're caught in a building pointing at Kennedy with a rifle. They're arrested. We don't know who they are. They're still alive, apparently. And they had weapons and they had bullets up there, but they let them go because they didn't fire a shot. Von Marlowe, okay, Thomas Arthur Valley. Santiago Garriga is an interesting person. Bill Simpich wrote about him. He's a guy who was helped by one of Harvey's secretaries, assistants, Pataki, Nita Pataki. She helped him set up a Fair Play for Cuba committee chapter in Miami in 63. Harry Power is interesting. This guy's associated with an attempt in San Antonio. Okay, and the rumor was about Harry Power is that he may have known Oswald. And he was suspected of maybe having taken shots at Walker. You talked about Richard Case. Now, this guy's interesting because Robert Beatty, now he's part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, and he's arrested in December 1963 after the assassination, making threats of taking out LBJ. It's another Fair Play for Cuba committee guy. Okay, this one I put, it's really interesting because it's the Liberty Lobby bombers, 1965. Stood out for me for 2 reasons. One of the 4 people arrested is a French-Canadian woman who was part of the FLQ, so that's one. But one of the other persons knew Che Guevara and was part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee. So, you know, the idea of what is this idea of being part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee and associated with an assassination or an assassination attempt? That's probably Northwoods. It's how do you blame an opponent, right, or the crime you're going to commit? That's what's going on here. If you look at some of the, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if you looked at the case linkage, 6 of the 8 named, because some are not named, we don't know who they are, right? But 6 of the 8 named murder-connected subjects are ex-military. Up to 5 were posted in the Far East like Oswald. One Valley worked on a U2 station. Okay. 2 others were pro-Castro Cuban exiles. Now this is strange. Valley, he was in Livingston, New York, and moved just in time for the motorcade in Chicago. Same thing happened to Oswald, right? He's moved from New Orleans to Dallas just at the right time. And the same thing happened with Lopez. He was in the Keys. And then all of a sudden he moves to Tampa just before the motorcade. Very suspicious. And of course, Oswald was being linked to a move himself to Washington. He was leaving all sorts of traces saying, hey, I'm going to go. Here's going to be my new address. And he's writing to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He's writing to the worker. And that's what he's doing. At least 9 out of 12 known subjects are Fair Play for Cuba Committee linked. At least 9. Now let's keep going. These people we can't link to a murder, an assassination attempt, but what we do know about them is that they're informants. Harry Dean is an informant, a lousy informant, but he's an informant. June Cobb. Thomas Vicente, he's the guy who sent Oswald his literature, okay? And he wanted to go to Cuba, and he had a trip organized for him to go to Cuba. Well, you know who helped organize the trip? Anita Patokny, the one who helped Garriga, Harvey's assistant. Okay. Harry Dean, you know what I found really interesting with him? Some people say, well, no, he can't be a spy, he can't be intelligence. He's a little bit off. Well, you know, the term useful idiot applies in many of these cases. And I come upon a Latin American file that says, hey, you know what? We think Harry Dean may have been taking bribes from a Cuban agent. In a Latin American file. What the hell are they doing there? He's maybe taking bribes, like Oswald, right? In Mexico City. That's in a file. John Glenn, not the astronaut. This guy's interesting. He's definitely ex-intelligence. He goes to Russia. He goes to Cuba, okay? And he's an informant. And he's got the workers and all that. So these people, Vincent T. Lee's another guy who's most likely an informant, Al Lewis, you name it. This, you agree with me, cannot be happenstance. You're going to say this is all luck. Is this all? No, there's a template. Next slide. Okay, let's take the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. I mean, how big was it? What are the odds that you would be linked to it? Okay, so it started around 1960. I don't have the exact date. At its peak, it had 7,500 members. But by 1963, it was informant infested, and that you can get from the FBI files. They said, we've got, they'd have a meeting. You would have maybe 12 people in a room. 4 or 5 would be informants. And they're taking one another's license plates. And they're reporting on what's going on. They showed a film, they did this, they did that. That's what's going on by 1962. After the missile crisis, I think it was in vogue to be part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. No, it dwindled, it died. In 1963, that organization was alive on paper only. And we know that because their key sponsor was the Socialist Workers' Party. And they said that in their meetings, in the minutes of their meeting. They said, what do we do with Fair Play for Cuba Committee? They said, well, you know what? Let's keep it alive on paper only. And this is when Oswald opens his chapter in the Deep South, in the worst city, on the worst block, right in the middle of the intelligence community. Okay. Now, 544 Dam Street, give me a break. All right, let me set this up. I'm gonna go into that building, the most right-wing building in New Orleans with Guy Bannister, Cuban exiles, lawyers, you name it. And I'm just gonna go on the floor that was once occupied by the Cuban Revolutionary Council. That's where the floor, that's where he was. And that's where he sets up shop. Sorry, you think this is Oswald's ideology? He did all this because he really likes Castro? Is that why he did that? There's no way. This was a mission. Yes. Okay, so we also know documents that came out. I think some of them came from Malcolm at your file, but I'm pretty sure that I found something there that showed that Stuckey, William Stuckey, who's in the radio station that interviewed Oswald, and Bannister were planning for the arrival of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee well before Oswald was there. Warren DeBreeze, FBI, overlooked the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans. Everybody recognize the name Warren DeBreeze? He happens to be the guy that Oswald wants to meet after a scuffle. Right? He doesn't meet him, but he's who he wants to meet. I'm in a little scuffle. We're going to go to a lot of bars in Scotland, and we're going to get in a little scuffle, and I'm going to call the Scotland Yard. Right? And they go, oh, we got in a little fight here, and they call me names, and I'm going to call the Scotland Yard. He calls the FBI, and they come. And they spend an hour and a half together. An hour and a half together or more, up to 3 hours. Oswald leaves for Mexico City days after the CIA plans AmSanta. AmSanta was run by McCloy Phillips, and it was a program to disrupt the Fair Play for Cuba Committee worldwide. Now, I have my theory on why Oswald calls DeBreeze in the US. It's internal, right? It's internal intelligence. So it would make sense that he would report to more the FBI than the CIA in the United States. That would make sense, right? Oswald was likely providing names to Bannister and DeBreeze. And yeah, I would say even the Paines. In other words, hey, Scotty, fill out this form. You know, I want to go. And he runs off to Payne. He says, hey, we've got another name for you, right? But I think also that he was maybe spying on Cuban exiles that were too radical because Kennedy wanted to stop mongoose. So he's probably playing both sides. And I don't think he, was he seen as a snitch? Did they catch on when the camps were closed and when they were getting screwed? So FPCC members that were informants were not James Falls. They weren't George Smiley's. They were useful idiots. Now, I couldn't find that much linkage between a plot and the plotters. I couldn't find it, thanks to the Secret Service. Couldn't find it until I got the Pepe letters. And I call it the mother of all prior plots. Here's the key thing. It occurred in November 1962. Just after the peak of the missile crisis. Documented in the Latin American CIA files. So everything I'm going to tell you is based on primary documents. It was first written about and researched and written about by Doug Campbell, and I think Bill Sipich looked into it, and we've collaborated since. We've exchanged information. When they closed this, by the way, the Secret Service and the FBI took this threat really seriously, really seriously. They weren't faking, they took it seriously. They thought it was a real plot. And they had suspects and you name it. You know when they closed it? Closed the case, November 21, 1963. That's when the Secret Service closed the case on the Pepe letters. I think it's a prequel to the successful plot that provides many clues, unlike the other plots. This one provides quite a few clues. Let's go on. First of all, before we go back to the Pepe letters, let's try and and I don't know, settle on what's going on in 1963, right? There are things clearly done to make Oswald look unhinged and pro-Castro. Does everybody agree with that? Or anybody dispute that? I mean, Mexico City, what do they say? He met Kostikov, guy in charge of assassination, supposedly. He was seen accepting bribes from Cuban agents by a guy called Alvarado. He says, hey, I saw him taking $7,000, right? I'm only mentioning 3 things that were done to blame a foe here, but there are a lot more than that. Okay, that's Oswald in Mexico City. Oswald's last letter that he sent to the Russian embassy in Washington. What was that all about? We'll look into that, but it was also to make him look in cahoots with the opponent. And in that letter, he validates Mexico City by saying things about Mexico City that no one would have known about. And then there are letters from Cuba. How many of you are familiar with the letters from Cuba? Oh, 5 letters from Cuba that came in. Okay, we'll look at those letters. Those letters are crucial because if you understand the 1963 letters and the Pepe letters have the same origins, you'll need everything to know on what's going on. These letters, by the way, you can find them in one of my articles. You can read the letters and they're definite, they exist. These are letters that were sent in November 1963 from Cuba to make Oswald really look to be in league with Castro agents. And they're called the Pedro Charles letters. Funny thing that happened, one of the letters didn't make it out of Cuba. There was a fire at the post office. And in the 1970s, Fabian Escalante, okay, who's in charge of, I think it's the equivalent of the Cuban Secret Service, he's very high up in intelligence, brought that letter. He didn't know, at least I don't think he knew. The Americans already had 4 letters, and he brought the 5th letter. Talk about those letters. Okay, so let's look at all of these things. We'll look at them. So, I mean, I think we can conclude from Oswald in Mexico City that he was clearly impersonated and likely was not even there. But it doesn't matter if he was impersonated. That's what counts, okay? He's interacting with Cuban agents and Kostikov. What's interesting in the most recent files is they're saying, you know what? Kostikov, we don't think he was in charge of wet affairs. That's what's come out in the recent files. But that's not what they were saying in 63 and 64. They were saying, oh, no, he's talking to the Russian who's in charge of assassinations, right? And who provided incriminating evidence against Oswald? It was Phillips's network, Alvarado, June Cobb, and others, okay? He even approached Veciana to tell Veciana, call your uncle, right? Call your uncle and tell him that you know stuff about Oswald because Veciana's uncle lived in Mexico City. Okay, so he tried to involve that to make, to provide a paper trail to make Oswald look like he was clearly in cahoots with Cuban agents. The goal was to set up that paper trail and to blame opponents for the assassination and to create the conditions favoring an invasion of Cuba. That's the goal. It wasn't a lone nut at first. And by the way, that's why many of us have a lot of proof. Too much toothpaste came out of the tube. You try to put it back in, right? There's too much out, but there's too many traces of a plot. And then all of a sudden, LBJ says, no, we're going to the lone nut route. Oh boy, back to the drawing board. Next slide. Now, Oswald's last letter, you can read that. I have an article on that called Oswald's Last Letter. It's at the Kennedys and King, and you can read the letter. The letter has many problems with it. First of all, it's typed. Most of Oswald's letters were handwritten. There's issues with the number of mistakes and the terminology he uses in the type letter versus the way he normally writes. Okay? In the letter, he denigrates the notorious FBI. By the way, this is early November 1963, 3 or 4 weeks before the assassination. Okay? He shows knowledge of Askew's return to Cuba. Nobody knew about that. Askew was a guy in the Mexican embassy. This guy returned to Cuba and he shows knowledge of that. And even the FBI was saying, how would he know that? He must have had inside information. This letter is intercepted by the FBI. It's typed. It has too few mistakes because we know Oswald wrote like a 6-year-old. It was written on Ruth Payne's typewriter. Of course, she provides a handwritten draft to the Dallas police after the assassination that Dallas police just didn't find. He found it. He keeps finding proof that they just so. Okay. Now, this is an important note. Boggs of the Warren Commission, Boggs, he suspected someone helped Oswald with his first letter to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Boggs, the commissioner, said, who helped him? There are not enough mistakes in this letter. So, and the Russians saw it as a concoction. After the assassination, they say, hey, look, this is a fake. Don't blame us. We didn't do it. They gave it to the, they brought it right away to the Americans and they say, it looks like somebody's trying to blame us. So they saw right through it. And that's exactly what they said, the Russians. This is a quote. One gets the definite impression that the letter was concocted by those judging from everything are involved in the president's assassination. This is what Dobrynin wrote. He knew it. He knew it. Next. Now, this one, you're going to enjoy this because we're all here to learn the letters from Cuba. If you go on in the article, you can read those letters. Okay. So what are these letters? There's basically 2 types of letters. 3 of them come from Cuban informants, and they're sent to RFK, the Voice of America, and the director of the ZRRIFLE. These letters are all postmarked shortly after the assassination, likely written before. Would that be written? The one that Fabian Escalante found in Cuba was postmarked November 23rd, one day after the assassination. Okay. They go to the RFK, the Voice of America, and the director of the Diario de New York, all anti-Castro organizations. And what they basically say is, hey, you know what? Oswald, when he was in Mexico City, we know he was meeting agents. We know he was meeting Cuban agents. These are sort of informants. It's written in Spanish, by the way, so you'll see the English version. But they're saying, we know that, you know, let us inform you or let us tell you about collaborators of Oswald. Okay? The one that remained in Cuba and another one were destined for Lee Harvey Oswald himself. Now, they were different. These were the Pedro Charles letters. And they said, hey, dear friend, when you're finished your job, you'll be received as a hero in Cuba. I told the big chief that you can blow out a candle from 50 yards. He was amazed. It's so bloody tacky, but it's no, so these are the letters from Cuba. Okay. 3 were typed on the same typewriter. So the FBI says, they're hell-bent to go the no nut route. They say, no, they're on the same typewriter. It's a hoax. The problem is these letters are talking about Mexico City. They're talking about Houston. They're talking about places that Oswald went that nobody would have known about. They could not dismiss it. Somebody had to know that he was in Mexico City who wrote those letters. Let's keep going. Yeah, so look, the incriminatory messages, close the business, money I gave you, right, to Oswald. Recommend Munch to the chief. I told him, Castro, you could put out a candle at 50 meters. When you come to Havana. Now, the letter 4 specifies that we gave you $7,000. That's almost exactly what Alvarado said. I think he said 6,500, right? Pedro Charles, he became a close friend of a former Marine and expert shooter Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City. So the informant is saying that Pedro Charles is the guy who wrote to Oswald. The informants are saying, we know he became a good friend of Oswald's. Those are incriminatory letters, right, that are sent. And overall, they corroborate Mexico City, show privileged knowledge of Oswald travels, and link Oswald to foreign agents, bribes, and the coming assassination. That was the goal of those letters. And they exist. They were looked at by the FBI. They're not made up. You can see them, you can read them, and you can analyze them. Next. Escalante's letter. So the G2 had a letter, and it was signed by Jorge, because Pedro would sign Jorge. Don't ask me why. And it had been found when a fire broke out. It's franked on the day Oswald was arrested, imagine. Okay? And look at what he says. I am informing you that the matter you talked to me about the last time that I was in Mexico would be a perfect plan and would weaken the politics of that braggart Kennedy. Although much discretion is needed because is needed because you know that there are counter-revolutionaries over there who are working for the CIA. See this, because these letters are really coming from Cuba. Who could oversee that?
Informants in Cuba themselves.
Well, it's definitely part of the leave behind or the assets they have in Cuba that people in the CIA, when they were in Cuba, probably knew. I mean, I can't say definitely, but there's a link there. They had assets and resources.
So could that be like Phillips, someone like that with his Mexico in?
Yeah, well, that's what I think. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
Mr. Propaganda.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. Now, let's get to the Pepe letters. So, you know, when you read all that, you say, geez, okay. And get on the Pepe letters. These are files I saw about 3 or 4 months ago. I'm reading these files. There are 3 Pepe letters. 3. 1962, right? A year earlier. At the peak of the missile crisis, when Kennedy is really contested by the Hawks, okay, there's a paper trail starting back then. The reason they're called the Pepe letters is because the person who signed the letters would sign it Pepe. Okay, so let's look at Mr. Pepe. Right? One was sent from Cuba to a guy called Bernardo Morales. Okay, and this is the key thing. And by the way, they made mistakes this time. They clearly made mistakes this time. They sent it to a unit called Radio Libertad. Now, Radio Libertad, remember one of the recipients that I told you for the Pedro Charles letters, and the was the Voice of America, right? This is a similar organization. It's got a satellite, an antenna in Miami, right next to Jamewave, right? And they're known to be CIA connected. Radio Libertad was CIA connected. It's known. Okay, so there's no Bernardo Morales who works there. And the people who are CIA connected get this letter. Of course, what do you think? Is that safe? Is that safe? What are they going to do with that letter? Well, you'll see what they did. The guy who sends the letter is Jose Menendez, and it's signed Pepe. Okay. Morales was unknown to those who handled the letter, okay, at Radio Libertad. They didn't know him. Okay. So what do? They give it to a CIA contact, a guy called Cajate. Jate, he's at Namot, which is the cryptonym. And what does he do? He brings it to his boss at JM Wave, likely Tony Sforza. Okay, he brings it. And the letter reveals networks of conspirators based in Miami and Washington and Cuba. That's what you can find in that letter. Okay, they're saying, hey, you know, our friends in Cuba and this and that and in Miami, and they'll help you. Okay, I'll get into more specifics later. It's postmarked November 29th, just after the height of the missile crisis, and it lamely suggested by sending the letter to the right-wing Radio Libertad, it would not be intercepted. I don't know the logic on that, okay, but that's what it says. Next slide. Okay, the letters, like the Pedro Charles letter, brutally links Fidel to a plot to kill JFK. If we are able to kill President Kennedy, it would be a great success, super extraordinary for Fidel. That's what you can read in the friggin' letter. You can't make this up. You can't make this up, okay? Marxist-Leninists 90 miles from the US paralyze imperialism completely, terrorize capitalism. Get in contact with your friends, you are an artist. That's what they're saying to the potential patsy, Morales, okay? Letter 3 is sent to, oh yeah, so it struck me that Radio Libertad is in 62 and Voice of America is targeted in 63. Okay, and these are Cold War vehicles for anti-communist propaganda. Now the information makes its way from JM Wave to the FBI and the Secret Service. They take it real seriously. They said, oh, geez, this guy, Menendez, he is a suspect. And they call it a plot. They're not saying it's a potential plot, is it? No, it's a plot. Next slide. Letter 2 was postmarked November 14th, sent to a guy called Antonio Rodriguez. He's a chauffeur for a guy called Colonel Hugo Trio, a suspected intelligence contact for the CIA from Venezuela. So that was sure to be intercepted and make its way to the CIA, right? The letter refers to the assassination plot in a similar way as the previous letter I showed you. Let's go to the third one. Okay, the third one was sent to Guatemala. It doesn't refer to the assassination, but it links Cuba to clandestine revolutionary activities in Guatemala. That's their way of saying, hey, Latin America, look up, this guy's a problem. So look, this is in file 124. Okay, it's an FBI file. And this is what you find. Okay. The sender's full name is Jose Menendez Ramos. Radio Libertad, it says, was CIA sponsored. So the FBI says it's CIA sponsored. Okay, it's not me. The report concludes that Menendez moved from Tampa, Florida, to Cuba in 1961. That he was being investigated as a suspect. Okay. Menendez had sent letters to V.T. Lee, according to FBI, but could not compare the handwriting. The FBI suspected subterfuge around the flagrant errors in addressing the letters. So the FBI is saying to himself, well, I mean, Morales doesn't even work there, right? And it's sent to a place that's sure to make its way into our pockets. They're wondering what the hell's going on. But if you look at this slide, when I looked at it, I almost passed up because there's a big hint here. Does anybody see what this means?
VT Lee was the guy in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Yeah. I said, VT Lee? VT Lee? Congratulations. I owe you a cigar. That's Cuban. It's here. I said, what? I said, no, not again. Not again. Not the Fair Play for Cuba Committee redux or predux. I don't know what you would call it, but 1962. No. Next slide. Keep going in this file. Menendez got a top job for the Cuban government after his return. He and his wife are said to be extremely pro-Castro and close to him. The sender, Jose Menendez, and his wife, Carrie Hernandez, had been described by an informant as members of the Tampa Fair Play for Cuba Committee. I ask you now, are the 62 letters and the 63 letters linked? And that's what I'm saying is the 62 letters, we don't have these kind of traces in the in the other prior plots, but this prior plot, we have these links. Okay, so let's keep going. The plot thickens. The plot thickens. Okay, so what happens to them? The handling of the letter is key here. Okay, it's crucial that you understand the handling of the letter. So it's sent to CIA-sponsored radio. And that is handled by two people that work for this place. Pepe and I don't know. These two people are anti-Castro. They're clearly anti-Castro, and they're part of a propaganda effort to discredit Castro. Okay. It's passed on to Cesar Cajati. The files show that he's a Nemat. Nemat is part of the Cuban exiles that were under JM Wave network. So he's one of them. Okay. He brings it to JM, this Nemat guy, most likely to Tony Sforza. Tony Sforza's name comes up a hell of a lot in Cuba intrigue, right? And all sorts of plots dealing with Cuba. Now, this gets confusing, but I'll try and make it less confusing later. The JM Wave memo went to Paul Maggio and Rufus Austin Horn. Horn was an SAS, counterintelligence, he was in there, who met with FBI liaison Sam Papich every day. Okay. Horn worked for Hal Swenson, who worked for William Harvey, okay, and later Des Fitzgerald. Pataki, Dancing, Kitchen, and others under Harvey are part of the letter handling. So when you look at all the memos and the letters, this group here, JM Wave, they're the ones handling the letters, they're writing memos. Right? Harvey is fully aware of this. Harvey is named in several memos concerning the Pepe files. Next slide. The importance of the letters, okay? Their timing. I can't stress enough how much the military, CIA, and even when we did our surveys, we asked when did it, you know, like we know the failed Bay of Pigs is a motivating factor. But when did it crystallize at one point in a decision to get rid of Kennedy, to eliminate it? It's certainly not later than December 1962, if you believe that this is a plot concocted by the plotters. There are obvious ploys. Two of the recipients, I didn't have time to get in all that, but when you look at two of the recipients, you can see that they're being given a pro-Castro profile. Two of the recipients. You can look into, so when you say they're patsyable, these would be people that you could set up with this paper trail. Not a slam dunk. If you read the letters, and you should do this, okay, when you go into the article on the Pepe letters, read the Pedro Charles letters and read these letters side by side. And tell me they're not from the same planners. It's certainly the same template, the same modus operandi, okay? And the kicker is that the sender is Fair Play for Cuba Committee link. That's the kicker. He joins the group of the other 9 people I said that were part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Von Marlowe, talked about Von Marlowe, we talked about Policarpo Lopez, we talked about obviously Oswald. And now this one here, we find out that the sender is linked to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Castro's network in the United States. That's what it was called, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Pataki, okay, the interception and handling are directly linked to Harvey's circle. Now, you can argue that, yeah, I'm handling it. Does that mean I sent it? Now, Pataki is interesting because Pataki links to Harvey. She links to Phillips. She links to Mexico City. She links to Thomas Vicente because Vicente is the guy she tried to help in his travels to Cuba. And she helps with Santiago Garriga, who set up a Fair Play for Cuba Committee chapter in Miami. Horn knew of Oswald. Horn, the guy, he knew about Oswald's arrest by them. He was involved in the Cubella affair. Hansink is linked to Sturgis and Hemming. The attempted recruitment of Askew. Hansink's involved in that. And of course, the file on all this, Oswald closed when? 1 day before the assassination. They closed it. Give me, this is freaking.
It's not a bark campaign.
It's not a bar. It's not a bar. Canadians are more polite. In the Netherlands, are pretty good at bicycling.
So that's about it.
Would say.
I'm making money.
Just want a medal. No, this is, so you read the Pepe letters, you have a template. Next. Okay. So now I'm going to take a step back and we look at all this and I'm going to say, well, does this fit into a modus operandi? Does it fit into the CIA playbook or a playbook? I should say really an executive action playbook. So we know that, let's start off with ZRRIFLE. Who is familiar with ZRRIFLE? Raise your hand. Okay, ZRRIFLE is the executive action plan written up by William Harvey. Very few traces. They found his handwritten notes. And basically they say, if you're going to kill someone, well, you have to find a way of blaming the Russians or the Czechs or the Soviets. You have to change the files, the paperwork to make it work, okay? You have to use surrogates. That's basically what you find in the, okay? And Harvey was known as the most compartmented officers in the CIA. Couldn't get anything out of him. And it's probably from the Philby experience because he knew Philby was a mole before Angleton did. He suspected it, but he was very, he would rarely talk about what he was involved in. The key from assassination is outsourcing. You don't get CIA shooters coming in, with guns ablazing or anything like that. It's outsourcing. So these are things that you could read just part, but you should look up. ZRRIFLE should have phony 201. Okay, in records integration to backstop this. All documents, they're in forged and backdated. He's saying to do exactly what people say, well, they put it together. Look at this. No, that's exactly what he's saying to do, okay? Should look like a CE file. Cover, planning should include provision for blaming souls or checks in case of Bleau. I think that's what we saw, right? With the Pedro Charles letters, the paper letters, Oswald in Mexico City, certainly looks like that. Next one. Northwoods very quickly. That was more of a military idea. It was say, okay, what do we do to provoke an opponent, to take on an invasion or something? So they came up with Northwoods. And basically, if you attack Guantanamo Bay, if you sunk a boat, if you downed an airline or whatever, you would have your excuse, right? So, killing the president is certainly a provocation. So that would fall into that category. Yeah.
I think Gulf of Tonkin was Northwoods.
No. Well, I mean, I think it was. I think it was a false flag.
Yeah, that's true.
But it didn't. it didn't happen what they said happened, but, and they went on that and. But, okay, let's keep going. Okay, this is good. Lansdale. Lansdale was brought in 1960 by J.C. King and Fitzgerald. He wrote a memo. Well, not Lansdale didn't write the memo. The memo was written by, I think, Fitzgerald, Desmond Fitzgerald. So he writes a memo. And he's writing it to J.C. King and James Noel, who's in charge of the Miami station in Havana. They still had a station in early 1960. And he says in that letter, it's very straightforward. Okay? It's called the acronym LC Harvest. Okay, site. Proposed operation to have Chinese communists blamed for assassination attempt. Of who? Either Guevara or the Castros. This is the memo. This is what it's about. And it's a cryptonym for the operations against the peoples of China. Scientists, Republic of China scientists, and efforts to monitor PRC state technology. Lansdale, of course, is notorious for using false flags. Let's go back to next slide. Okay, so look at the plan. This is Lansdale's plan, right? The title says it all. Look, proposed operation to have Chinese communists suspected of assassination attempt. Doesn't that say it all? Right? Next. Please. Oh, one back, please. Go. One. I'll go back. I saw a date or something. Okay, you see. So let's keep going. Oh, that's one more back, right? Okay, sorry. Two forward. Okay. This is what he writes. Okay. Sorry about the reproduction here, but would have to be based on detailed knowledge of proposed victims' habits, movements, and exposure to the public, providing a basis, providing a brief for timing an attack and selected site from which attempt could be made. In other words, he's saying, let's figure out where Castro is going to be, what his movements are. Does he have a motorcade? Will he be in Daly Plaza? What will be his motorcade route? I mean, he's kind of saying, that's what we're looking for. Let's keep going. Well, I think you moved to, right? Okay. It would be helpful if sketches and maps could be prepared to show routes of travel, time intervals, place of vantage, sites of police station, routes of escape, location of safe sites, primary and alternate means of exfiltration after the attempt, locations of sites for caching the weapons and for picking up travel documents. That's part of his plan. Again, now let's keep going, it gets worse. Okay, such materials could then be worked into an operation attributable to the Chinese communists by the introduction of suitable Chinese touches and would provide documentary support to the prima facie evidence of the funds and rifle. It's not as if the shenanigans around a rifle or money, documents or paperwork isn't something. And look, they go on to say, we believe that without authentication described above, the combined rumor and evidence will readily be detected as a provocation. Doesn't that tell you that whether it's the client's paperwork or whether it's, no matter what it was, they will make it work, right? We can do that with the paperwork. We can do that with the weapons. We have to make it, I don't know how they do it, but they can do it. But, Okay, this is a great one because file 178 is a recently declassified document. It's called black letters. Black letters is really interesting. Covert operations which make use of the mail, including forged letter mailed in Prague to a Czech leader, mailing of black letters primarily from third countries. However, see page 5 anyway. Some of these letters may have been inserted into the mail system ostensibly as having originated in the denied area. Let's keep going. In other words, you want the recipients to believe that this letter came from the Chinese communists, so you can make it appear as if it had been mailed from China. Note that the last item in this group refers to letter insert mechanisms. I can find no elaboration of what this means, but it might represent interception of the mail, surreptitious opening of a letter, and the insert of some additional material to incriminate, obviously. Okay, let's no one before. Steady. This category represents probable entry into the international mail system to support a covert operation. The first item shows DOD sending letters ostensibly from groups in North Vietnam to other countries. The second shows CIA fabricating and mailing 700 letters ostensibly from Peking. The third letter shows CIA fabricating Democratic Republic of Vietnam greeting cards and mailing them. Oswald's last letter, the 1963 letters from Cuba, and the Pepe letters were black letters. They were black letters, if you ask me. They're saying that they do that. Right. Let's keep going. Okay, let's get to Bissell now. Dick Bissell. He was in the top 3 of the CIA under Dulles, right? And Dick Bissell was interviewed by both the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Committee. And he talks of 3 leaders targeted for assassination: Lumumba, Sukarno, Castro. And here's how you commit an assassination. He's telling them, here's how you do it. You would make a small special unit, highly compartmented from rest of organization. At first I was saying, geez, what does this go from Dulles or Fitzgerald to so-and-so to so-and-so to so-and-so to so-and-so? It's not what's happening. It's a small unit that is isolated and picked for a mission. Very compartmented. Very few people know. Okay? Identification of an asset to kill Castro, to kill Sukarno. Mafia asset selected to kill Castro, right? Very different kind of operation, not carried out through DDP or clandestine services office. So this is so crucial because it's giving us an idea that, hey, you know what? We're going to go straight to the assassination czar. We're going straight to him. We're not going to his boss. We're not going to go. We're going to him. This guy will have a mission. Okay, that's key. So, no, not look. Through several intermediaries or Office of Security, because it was the Office of Security that chose Roselli, met with Roselli. Okay, using their personnel. Then what does he do? He asks William Harvey to look into plan to kill Castro. Okay, so isn't that his small specialized unit will be under this guy for Castro? Right? That's how I interpret it. Keep going. Okay, they're saying probably some money in such items as pills and other devices through a number of cutouts or intermediaries to a group which we ourselves, of course, did not in any way direct, sense, control. This was not an operation of such character that the communications would run through agency channels, or the authorization on the spot would be by agency personnel. So he's saying that, executive action is a different beast. It's just a different beast. We don't go through covert operations. We don't go through these channels. We do something that is very isolated. Keep going. And then he says, this is Bellin saying, basically they use Cuban exiles, but CIA agents, but the exiles who were being used were not necessarily CIA agents. So he's saying, even if they used Cuban exiles, the ones we used to kill Castro weren't necessarily enough for 66. I don't know how much you can believe that. But, okay, let's keep going. So, QJWIN. You go to file up there, 135. Malcolm, do you know what the file's 135? Is that Rockefeller or is it?
No, it's like a intelligence file number, 135.
If you go on Mary Farrell, they indicate the intelligence organization 135. I kind of think it's Rockefeller.
Actually,
No, it might be Church. I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But QJWIN, it's not a person. You see that? It's a talent spotter program linked to ZRRIFLE. In other words, QJWIN is, you're going to get an assassination done. You need to find an assassin. And this, by the way, you know, it's for sabotage, it's for, so how do you do it? You find a talent spotter. The talent spotter could be a guy like Roselli, okay? And the talent spotter, okay, it's always linked to ZRRIFLE. So the talent spotter will find the killers. Are they from the mafia? Are they from, who knows? Okay, Cuban exiles. Harvey applied it in plans to remove Lumumba. The removal of Lumumba involved two people. I think O'Connell is one, but definitely Harvey was not. So he's the case officer designing the assassination of Lumumba. And how does he do it? He uses QJWIN 1, Jose Marie Andre Mankel from Luxembourg. Mankel tries to spot Corsican mafia people. Now, why Mankel? Why Corsican? What do we know about the Congo, French colony? They speak French. Corsicans speak French. Mankel speaks French. Corsican mafia is sort of like the Sicilian mafia. They have plenty of killers, right? Mankel had been spotted by a CIA guy called Silver. Silver, I think, was associated to Luxembourg. Not sure. And finally, Harvey hires Mankel. And he says, find me the killers. Right? It was only known to Helms and Bissell, Lumumba assassination. So there's your really small unit. Okay, it's Helms, Bissell, and Harvey. And then outsource it. Right. So Mankel's, now interesting with Mankel, his contract is terminated in February 1964, not long after the assassination. Next slide.
Judge committee is 157, yeah, and the Rockefeller Commission, if I'm correct, is 178, if I'm not mistaken.
I think there's State Department, but if you go on the Mary Farrell, you'll see the file releases. But I'll get it. Okay.
Do you want to come in there, Joseph?
Pike.
135 is Pike. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. Pike was really
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Okay, so Johnny Roselli, is he QJWIN too? Maybe he wasn't given that cryptonym, but here are a few things. He has similar with a QJWIN profile, right? He's Harvey's crony for ZRRIFLE. Okay, because when Harvey worked with Roselli, they had eliminated from the picture Trafficante and eliminated him. And in phase two, Harvey is working with Roselli. Okay. And his meetings with Roselli, even though he was kind of exiled to Rome, continued well into 1963. Okay. There's a hotel built for Harvey, okay, in, I think it's Miami, it's in Florida, right? And the hotel bill is under the cryptonym ZRRIFLE QJWIN. It's an actual bill that they paid, right? And Roselli is a key talent spotter to remove Castro. And remember what happened to Roselli when he said the talent used to remove Castro turned to kill JFK, was turned by Castro to kill JFK. He spoke too much. It's found floating in a drum, and his days were numbered.
Didn't they say he committed suicide?
Pardon?
Didn't they say he committed suicide?
How did he close his mouth?
Exactly.
Sorry, where'd you get this last bit when he said talent used to remove Castro turned to kill? Where's that from? From one of the documents?
So that I think is from the Anderson interview. Right? 6 different cases. I feel good. I feel pretty certain. Okay, Harvey should be confronted with this listing. Okay, so the researchers say, Harvey's got to explain this bill. Why is he meeting a assassination spotter at that time in 1963 with Roselli? That's kind of a clue then. Okay, next slide. So, if I look at this, if you look at the plotters, if I try to explain to someone who killed Kennedy, I would say I likely think, or I think that it was likely regime change specialists. Okay, and I should go even farther. Regime change specialists really specialized in executive action. Not many of them. You think of Morales or Sforza or some, but Harvey come to mind right away, right? There are two key tactics: propaganda to claim a foe and set up a patsy. And then you have ZRRIFLE QJWIN executive action. You see that this permeates through what we're looking at here, right? I would say that it was very small, compartmented, outside normal BDP channels using surrogates. Need to know and deniability are key. Know how to set something off that forces unwitting compliance and cover-up. So let me get back to that. You know all the people that were handling those letters? They didn't know what the plot was. They didn't know what the plot was. So the letter comes in, I got this letter, I'm gonna give it to him, it goes to him, but they don't know what the plot is. They might figure it out after. Say, oh, something's weird here, right? And if it's the FBI intercepting the letter, God, does it stink for them, right? So if you can taint the people in this whole process and that they're involved unwittingly, you have a very, very good program that everybody wants to step away from and say, let's not, you know. So if Oswald was an informant for the FBI, how much does the FBI feel like solving the case? Yeah, he was our informant, you know, so let's keep going. Okay, this is key. Can you hyperlink to that? Yeah. This is what Dave Boylan. Okay, so I'm going to try and explain what this is. This is just part of the CIA organizational chart, 1963. It's called the Special Affairs Staff section. Okay, so way the CIA would, you had the special group augmented, which was the higher ups of the Pentagon, the CIA. You had Secretary of State, you had RFK in that group. And they'd have discussions. They'd meet, I think, weekly and say, hey, what do we do about Dominican Republic? What do we do about this? What do we do about that? So-and-so is a hell of a problem. Coded words. Now, someone, maybe Lansdale, will pick up on this, maybe Fitzgerald, right, who replaced, this used to be William Harvey. And that's when the special affairs staff would get involved in clandestine. So if we had say, hey, we're gonna have to, harass the Cubans and ruin their economy and whatever, it would be within this group, right? And you see an awful lot of the names. You see Austin Horn here, we see Anita Pataki, and these people were answering William Harvey, right? You see Paul Maggi over here. These are names that people that were involved in all this. But if you were going to do an assassination, what Bissell is someone above Harvey. This was Harvey. And then Harvey would outsource. He'd start working. Only if he desperately needed someone. I think he may have desperately needed David Evans. Because for all the propaganda, the letters coming in and everything, I think he may. These are regime change specialists. By the way Dave Boylan has done this, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Because you'll be able to hyperlink on every name and get a profile. And this is just the SAS. He's done this for Jan Wade. He's done this for the whole CIA world in 1963. It's crazy. Next.
Monster job.
Oh. So if you ask me my opinion, okay, it's an opinion. Startup, like I actually believe the motives built up over time, with all the components, but the decision it's crystallizing in a coordinated attempt to remove him sometime near the peak of the missile crisis. Motive, JFK was not good for US economic and security interests. That's where I'm at. Yeah. You can include the civil rights, you can include all that, but black letters, Lansdale's playbook, Bissell executive action testimony, and Northwoods, these are the tactics that permeate through the broader plots. These are tactics mastered by Lansdale, William Harvey, David Phillips. They are regime change specialists. Phillips' network is omnipresent in the false flag operation around Oswald in '63. Harvey's network is very closely connected to the characters involved in the post-reception of the phase of Pepe letters, as well as QJWIN activities. Harvey asked for security clearance for Claire Blue's booth in July 1963 while in Rome. Now, why is that important? 6 months. We know that Claire Blue's booth interacted a heck of a lot with the DRE. It was very involved in, that's Carlos Bringuier, that's is it Operation Tilt, I think, but she got involved with the Cuban exiles in raids, and then she became the go-to person for the DRE when they wanted to say, hey, you know what, Oswald, we debated him, he's part of the FPCC. They call Claire Blue's booth. Okay, so she's involved in the propaganda. Harvey and Phillips connect closely through their regime change operations history, members of their networks and relations between TFW and Mexico City. Both shared a hatred of Kennedy's. Hardway suspected both of them. Hardway suspected both of them. Okay. SAS was a critical conduit between regime change operations and those who set policy. The post-assassination analysis was cursory and evasive. Next slide. Okay, so look, I'll share this, but it's a lot to retain. But if you read these articles, at Kennedy's and King, prior plots, the FPCC, Oswald's last letter, the Pepe letters, Lansdale's playbook. If you read some of Doug Campbell and Simpich's work, John Newman, Bill Simpich, and Carmine Savicino have a lot that they've written about QJWIN. They're the ones who first figure out the QJWIN cryptography. Tipping point, I think, is interesting. And these files. So I'll make them available. And next slide. I think it's over, right?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and Johnny, maybe if you can get me a beer, that would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to make one supporting point. In a pretty famous incident when John Newman and Jefferson Morley visited Jane Roman with a document with respect to Lee's visit to Mexico City, whether or not the real Lee. Her answer, as they said, what's going on with this? It had to do with who was sending what to whom. And as I remember, part of her answer was, an admission was, well, the only thing I can say is that this would indicate a special SAS interest in this.
Oh, did he say SAS?
We said
SAS.
I have to.
Sorry, yeah, I thought it was operational interest in Harvey, but it may have been
But-
ASA, yeah.
Or perhaps that has come more recently out of an examination that Jefferson Morley did with,
Okay.
of those papers. I'll track it down, but I remember it because I didn't know what SAS was.
Oh.
And have been sort of wondering, oh, what's SAS? And here they are, the central organizational structure for what you're looking at. So I'll track down the SAS reference, but it kicks back to, you know, a pretty major incident in.
We'll be producing the whole CIA org chart. The whole. Dave Boylan did a lot of work. I did some, but Dave did, and Jeff Meek is another great guy who's been, you know, and they are two Americans, by the way, so
Yeah.
show that I'm not too hard. But, I'm kidding you. They did great work, and I think that once you understand who does what, because again, when I'm on these radio stations and they say, who killed him? And they don't understand what the difference is between clandestine services and, you know, just pure spying or espionage or data collection. You know, you have to go back. Like we have a nice group here, but with the radio person, you have to go to the ABCs. Who's Jack Ruby? I mean, those are the questions they have. You know, who the heck's Jack? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I finished.
Oh, sorry. Where's that beer?
No, I was going to ask something about, I'll let Malcolm go first.
Yeah.
Better.
Uh,
You know your place here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of meat in that hamburger. That was a terrific presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Let's take it.
Thank you. Oh, there's a lot in there, and I have to say, a lot of it is from files that I looked at in the last 7 months. Some before declassification and a few from the black letters. I don't think it's been out, not even redacted form. I don't think so. The black letters is an embarrassing thing, really. Because it takes Contel Pro to a new level.
I'm interested in the Chinese communists.
This is crazy.
And because I worked with Bill Simpich back 14, 15 years ago on the Ramon Cortez Buenestra stuff, which is like a massive dump of CIA documents onto the FBI immediately after the assassination. The slug line says, starts off with Chi-Com plot.
Yeah.
And really what they were trying to do was hand off like a crazy idea. There's this idea that the Chinese communists were responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy.
Well, after the assassination, there's a few lingering files that are saying, associating, and I think Cortez has got, that they're associating with the plot. And I think that it's Lansdale, you know, Lansdale's baby is Vietnam, right?
There were screw ups in everything. Clause because there's a Cortez document in Lee Harvey Oswald's 976 file from 1961. Was then transferred into his, when they consolidated that, the FBI consolidated, cold, file.
Yeah.
Went into 10582 trouble.
Are you sure?
Later in
She need it. No.
You sure?
So the timing there is important. But it's interesting that document, the CIA document on transcontinental Cortez.
Yeah.
Was in Oswald's file.
When I saw Chicom plots, I said, what the hell's this?
Yeah.
It says, okay, it was always Russia, Cuban, but all of a sudden, Chinese communists.
That's an interest of mine because, and then also, first date, that also was in touch with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. What's your first date on that?
I have that in mid 1962, April. He arrived right in May, I think, April, May, in May.
It's into June, I think, yeah.
Didn't he arrive on the boat in May? Oh, you're saying June he arrived? No, I'm not talking about in New Orleans. I'm talking arrived from Russia.
Fort Worth.
Okay. I found some documents from your files that seem to say September about 62.
They were writing the Fair Play, obviously, allegedly responding to an Oswald letter.
Yeah.
In July 62.
July 62.
July 62, yeah, which is way too early.
So
So the cover story was obviously, you know, the legend is like screwed up at that point. And I didn't find that. A great researcher called Stan Clark from Dallas found that. That was in the original evidence.
Yeah.
They obviously took, the FBI obviously took the letter and left the envelope in with the Fair Play for Cuba.
Yeah.
And it's there with the stamp, July 62. You can't read the date, but it's July.
So you bring it earlier than I think.
Yeah, too early. He's at the Mercedes address. 602.
Scott?
Yeah, when I was researching the David Christensen Kirk Newton incident, which was in picking up chatter between Lisbon and Angier about a possible attack on JFK, a name that came to my mind that I didn't really knew much about was Thomas Eli Davis III. And apparently Jack Ruby's first lawyer, Tom Howard, asked Ruby, you know, is there anything or anybody that that you're not telling me about that could really harm our defence? And he mentioned Thomas Eli Davis III. And the thing about Thomas Eli Davis III is that he was arrested in Algiers on the 23rd of November 1963. Famous date. And he was released from prison, and his release was facilitated by QJWIN. When I was kind of researching, I thought QJWIN was a person, obviously, maybe most people did. And what Davis was arrested for in Algiers was gun running to the OAS, who were the anti-Algerian independence group. And I'm just trying to put together if there is a link between Davis, QJWIN, the OAS. You then had the rumours of like an OAS assassin around the Dallas area in 1963. And did the CIA use the OAS for as part of the ZRRIFLE campaign? Was Thomas Eli Davis the third part of that whole?
It would make real sense that the people involved in attempts on the goal would be in the prospect list or the candidate list for a spotter, because I'm sure the Americans, when they developed their executive action program, they interviewed the English and French. They went inside, they saw the English, and they asked, and the English said, "Oh, well, you better talk to the French. They're better than we are." But the point is that You see Corsican and you see, you know, the whole story around the Day of the Jackal. I can't say I'm specialized in it, but you can see that they're saying, no, we better go with an outsider to kill him. You know, so you need the talent spotter. Okay, so a guy like Harvey in Rome doesn't have the same contacts he has in the US, right? So to me, it would make, if you want to create those layers, and I wouldn't be surprised. It would make sense. And it's true that I remember linking Davis to QJWIN, but it's a bit far. And I was aware of that story, but that would be really interesting to look into. Any other questions?
Just, not quite, because when you went through your slideshow, I think you were talking about a small compartmentalized operation with a few people, and you said outside of the
DDP.
outside of it.
Outside of that. Well, outside of the normal channels of the DDP.
Well, yeah, because there is a system. Edward Ryan, a trainer, gave that information to them. The system is that you can run very tight compartmentalized operations alongside Staff D. We get back to Harvey, Staff D, so you can use the Como channel. To do that, you have to go to policy coordination staff, the ADDP and the DDP to make a case that you have to use that, your permission to use that channel, special permission to use that secure channel. That's where any of those operations that you're talking about would be run through adjacent to Staff D.
I think so.
Dan Hardway, we've always agreed on this. It's like a piggyback.
Oh, it is.
On an existing channel. So you can keep down to just a few people.
You can keep it very,
Bare essentials.
you know,
But all that stuff, interestingly, Ed Ryan said, all that stuff exists. All that stuff, those operations that run exist in the counterintelligence staff archives. They're always kept, they're never destroyed. Of course, we're never going to see them, but they're never destroyed. All this operation that you're talking about, all these operations, the paperwork still exists.
this is, I'll say this is why I say when you do a similar case analysis, we shouldn't just think of Chicago, San Antonio. Okay? That was enough to tell me there's a template. We should be looking at Chile. We should be looking at Che Guevara. We should be looking at Vietnam. We should be looking at, we have about 20 regime changes we are looking into. You see that it's regime change specialists from that chart or Wave. You see the names Morales come back. You see the names Felix Rodriguez. You see them come. So these people, you can only conclude that the Kennedy assassination is an internal regime change operation. That's what you have to conclude from. And who would you give it to? The people who have the practice of having done it in foreign countries. I think. I mean, do I have slam dunk proof of that? No, but that's much more. That's much. When you say, did the CIA kill JFK? No, I don't think the CIA killed JFK. Was there an operation, and who gave the green light, and who? You can suspect certain people. But boy, did they put in mechanisms to create distance between the shooters and the CIA. So,
you know about the 5412 committee that Nixon was the chairman of when he was VP?
it was called what?
5412 committee.
Rings a bell, but I know.
Yeah, in the 50s. So Nixon was VP to Eisenhower for 8 years. And for a majority of that time, he was the chair of what we would call the Assassination Committee. He was okay in assassinations, and they changed the name of the committee for obvious reasons every so often. The one I looked at was the 5412 committee because it was December 54. And the story goes, you've probably heard the story, Nixon contacted Howard Hughes, asked him to get some assassins. All right. Well, this is where it connects through to Watergate. I'll send you some information. Be great.
That's where I'm investigating. I don't want to do another chokehold.
Mm.
That's what I said, you know, where do I want to go for? Is this who, what, where? Okay, I think the plot is a fact. The fact that the conspiracy is a fact. So next time I'm on a radio station, I want to be able to explain this in 2 minutes.
Yeah. That'll be a job and a half, that's for sure.
Question from Robert.
But putting it together, like, sorry.
Go
ahead.
No, just the way you put it together in such a concise manner, basically grabbing it all in.
You have to go through a funnel.
Yeah.
You have to go through a funnel. You have to start wide. And okay, and you have to come and say, well, look, there is a template. Who can handle such a template? And then, well, how you structure, what is the structure in place for that template to take place? We were discussing this at lunch hour. The Pepe letters on their own are innocuous. They're innocuous. It's only when you juxtapose them with the Pedro Charles letters that you say, wait a minute. So sometimes that's the way. You're not going to find a smoking gun file that says we met Oswald on such a date and you know, we set him up and we told him to go to the Dexter school book. You know, you're not going to find that. But every now and then you'll find a file that is innocuous unless you're able to put into context with another file, or as Malcolm was saying, an interview that took place, or something that says, wait a minute, I know what that cryptonym now means because of that interview. And then when you figure out the cryptonym in the file, you say, oh, it's this guy. They're talking about this guy. Like the Lansdale letter, the memorandum from Fitzgerald, not one name is given. There's only cryptonyms. So I went into the cryptonym database of Mary Farrell and I said, okay, this guy is Fitzgerald, this guy is, so you know, you have to have your little guide beside you when you're going through these files. And the cryptonyms aren't always right. They're usually pretty good, but you're reading them and say, oh, okay. So once you figure that out, you know, and then you say, oh, well, and you know, they didn't know back then that we'd have databases with the internet and declassification and networks of people busting cryptonyms. That was probably the last thing on their mind, you know. I mean, who can go to the archives in 1967 and read a memo and say LC Harvest, you know? So you know, you look at it, there's a limit to their methods, right? And with time, well.
When you think about those old researchers just writing letters to each other, Weisberg and, you know, keeping all the
Think of it.
I mean, how onerous must that have been? You know,
Typing letters out.
typing letters and speaking, you know,
Physically.
physically
Waiting.
posting letters, waiting 2 weeks for a reply
At least.
from a researcher on the West Coast.
Yeah.
You know,
And I asked the wrong question.
incredible stuff.
You needed also an occasional insider like Gaetan Fonzi,
Yeah.
who could come in and said, hey, we questioned this bugger. And I
Yeah.
talked to him and I was up close and so they had their hands on classified information. And if every now and then, if one of them, a Fletcher Prouty or Fonzie could tell you something, you could enter that world a bit. But now we can enter it much better. Nice.
Any more questions?
There's no questions in the chat, but Johnny's made a couple of comments. SAS has got special affairs staff.
Yes.
Responsible for CIA operations directed against the government of Cuba and the Cuban intelligence services.
Okay. So I may have made that a little bit too, like I was saying, clandestine I may have given the impression it was worldwide, but it's Cuba, SAS.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.